Or I forget that.
When you say John, Matt, it means something a bit different.
I
Yeah,
mean,
okay.
I can't really detach my John and bring it into the frame, but maybe you guys can.
I didn't mean that for sure.
He's not asking for you to show anything.
Yeah, I could work it out. I can make it
Anyway,
work.
as far as the person John here, do you have you heard any of ours for the just our general format? Is
Yes, I
okay,
have.
which is to say there's not that much of a format, but
Yeah,
Right.
I can deal.
okay. Well, I guess we'll jump on into this then if you want to get the ball rolling, Luke.
In at number one on the best list, it's strike action.
All right, we're getting straight to the strike to the straight to the strike. That's hard to say. Okay, I worked it out
Straight to
finally.
the strike.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
hard?
Well,
Straight to the
your
strike.
your brain isn't, have the messed up wiring that mine does in the speech centers apparently. This is films and filth. We're still kind of on strike, looking at strike movies. Movies. God, I can't talk this morning. This is going to be exciting. This is Matt here. Mark's
Mark, you should
laughing.
go next.
This is Mark next.
This is Luke.
And today there is a person named John. John Arminio. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I'm going to try and get the name right this time. Popcorn Eschaton. Did I get your podcast right?
Yes, sir, you did.
Okay, because I intentionally didn't look it up. I was like, my memory can handle
Okay.
this. I can't talk today, but my memory can handle it. So, and you brought today's film to our attention. I assume. Well, Mark and I haven't heard of it. I'm assuming Luke had not heard of this film.
I had not.
Yeah, that I would have been kind of surprised if you did. So, John, you brought this one to us, which is relatively pertinent for the current situation and a recalibration of our podcasting. So, how did you come across this one?
Yeah, so Salt of the Earth from 1954 is a movie that I had known about for a long time, but I'd only seen it earlier this year. And, it's sort of a notorious movie made during the height of the Red Scare in the 50s by people, notably writer Michael Wilson and director Herbert J. Biberman, who were blacklisted. And so they sort of said, hey, what can they do to us? Lock us up for contempt again. And they made a stridently pro-union, pro-labor, anti-capitalist movie about in actuality it was a copper mine strike in New Mexico, organized by largely Mexican American miners, and it's firmly on the side of the strikers, and it's the pretty much at this point the only movie in Hollywood history to look at how a strike works, how a union works, how organized action can be effective, and it also takes a look at how sort of the internet intersectionality of being like a woman minority in a poor community, and how that affects both your status in society and your relationship to organized labor.
I was thinking of the only like something similar I'd seen in film to this, which is 15. I mean, I saw the movie this year, but 15 years ago, Ocean's 12 has this really stupid sequence of Casey Affleck like accidentally starting a labor strike in similar conditions, which puts a wrinkle in their heist plans or whatever. Or is that
Mm.
Ocean's 13? It's one of the Ocean's movies. Maybe it's 13, but yeah, I was like, that's such a like kind of goofy, funny version of this. You'd kind of expect it to be the other way around, where they didn't take it seriously in 1954 and did, in the 21st century. But I
Yeah,
guess
I
that's
mean,
Hollywood for you.
the most prominent union movie, especially in this decade, was On the Waterfront, and that's a movie where the union is the villains and the whistleblower is the good guy. So this is a complete flip on that idea. And there have been union movies before but they had always come under sort of the fire of the Breen office and the Hayes Code, which, were very, they had their antenna up for any even slightly communist messaging in those movies.
And they were communists as hard. I mean, I think that was a thing. They're calling us communists, so hey, let's do it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
until recently, the only time I've seen unions in movies has been in gangster movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Once Upon a Time in America, which keeps coming up.
Yeah.
We basically see Treat Williams as the guy who's the union guy. We barely see anything he does except for he shows up on TV and Robert De Niro's like, he's a liar. It's just there isn't much to it at all. It's almost like intentionally veiling any of that stuff.
Yeah, there's two really great union movies from later, Blue Collar, directed and written by Paul Schrader, which is a great movie, but that deals more with the like three guys who are really down in their luck and the relationship with how terrible their union is specifically, and how terrible their company's treating them. And then there's John Sales's Matewan from 1987. That's an extraordinary movie about the Appalachian Coal War in the 1920s, where like mining companies literally used airplanes to bomb strikers and like poisoned milk that they knew children would drink. Like they did some real war crime kind of stuff to American citizens. So highly recommend that movie.
And like you mentioned coming in, this movie kind of doubles down like we're not finished with it. We're not, it's just not the union stuff, but we're going to toss in some women's rights for good measure. Yep. Also, the 50s not, notoriously maybe not being the best time for women's rights.
Certainly not.
well, this feels I'm fully radicalized, so perhaps biased. This movie feels a lot more like it is trying to tell me it's trying to show me the virtues of feminism than it is trying to show me the virtues of communism. At least that's the read I get from it, is that it feels like it assumes that you don't want the women to pick it, where I was clearly just like, yeah, go pick because let the women go kick all the cops' asses, please do. But also it takes the very probably radical for the time perspective of the men learn things in this. Yeah. they do, and people talk to each other, and really these are probably some of the best, most realized characters in any film that we've watched for this podcast so far. I feel like the dialogue's very natural. People joke with each other. People seem to respect each other who work together. They discuss, I don't know, they discuss their biases openly.
Well,
yeah, there's lots of little character moments that like I don't usually expect to see when I watch films this old. Just little jokes between characters who are not even major characters, little things. It is very well made. And usually when we watch a film this old, we point out something that's missing, and I couldn't really spot anything this time.
It's really interesting.
Surprised.
Like, how it's a testament to the film's naturalism, because it's definitely influenced by like European neorealist movies of like the late 40s and early 50s, and that helps bring out those character moments, especially in the script and in how it's filmed in such a naturalistic way, because so many of these actors are non-professionals. They were actual miners from the area, and so with that like, you don't need professional actors to communicate the story, because it's so like ingrained in these people's experiences, and you can see that on screen. Like the woman who plays Esperanza, and then like like one of the cops and the like the union, the company representative, like those are the only professional actors on the movie. Everybody else was like friendly locals or actual miners.
That's Rosaura. Oh man, I just got dug my hole for myself for pronouncing her name. Sorry.
Yeah.
Revelitas. I'm sure I didn't get that correct at all. But yeah, this is the only movie she made in America. She would have made more movies in America, but they didn't let her make any after this, because she was
deported because of this movie. Mhm.
I guess
Yeah,
it could,
this is
yeah.
not going to be much of a stepping stone for anybody,
No,
unfortunately.
no.
Yeah.
Except for onto our podcast.
There you go. Yeah, I mean,
It's
well,
a-
looking at 60 years later, 70 years later, sure, why not?
The 7.4 out of 10 on IMDb, which is higher than our usual things that we bring ourselves.
Well, we've been, especially after Halloween, we've definitely upped the schlock button, which is fun. You want to watch fun, creepy, stupid stuff for October, which is most. I mean, we had a few good choices, I think, but we were watching goofier stuff, so now we have to come crashing back down to earth with a serious movie. Before I get too far, this is one where I probably should read the plot in case someone didn't watch it, but it is very much on YouTube, and you can watch it in reasonable-ish quality.
And I would recommend it, even if you think you won't like it. I think that if you like the idea of like a gripping drama, then definitely watch this.
Well, there's a tab on Wiki here that just says the full film that you can click on. So I guess you could do that if you wanted. But
yeah.
Working conditions at Delaware Zinc in Zinktown, New Mexico started bad and are only getting worse. The union strikes, the company refuses to negotiate, and worker Ramon Quintero is unjustly beaten by police and imprisoned while his wife Esperanza gives birth to their third child. The company obtains a legal injunction that bars the miners from picketing, so the women of the community take their place on the picket line instead. Ramon will not allow Esperanza to join the other ladies, but she eventually does so anyway, new baby in hand. The man, that's the man with a capital M, of course, responds by temporarily tossing the leading women and their children into jail. The final straw comes the next day as the company attempts to evict the Quintero family from their company-owned home. The community stands up in solidarity to fight the eviction, which finally drags the company to the bargaining table. No proletariat revolution quite yet, though, at least not in this movie. But I guess that's the difference between this and, say, like an Eisenstein. That one would end with your revolution.
And it ends realistically. It's realism.
Yes. It's
I was
realistic
just wondering
without that automatically meaning like hopeless and miserable, which is often what realistic means when people use that word to describe films.
I suppose there's supposed to be a glimmer of hope, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, it's like there is. They struck. They were
won,
on
right?
strike. Yeah, they won the strike after, what was it, 7 months? 8?
More than 6
several
for
months.
Sure.
Yeah. In real life, this strike was successful as much as a strike from Mexican American miners can be in the 1950s in America.
Although,
because if you're our age, if you're Maya and Matt's age, one of the earliest strikes we heard about was the Eastern Airlines strike, which basically Reagan just destroyed everything over it.
Well, I'm from Europe where strikes regularly work.
What an idea. Yeah, in historical retrospect, like that action by Reagan was really sort of the death knell for union action for the next 35 years in America, unfortunately. And so we're getting a real resurgence in it over the last 5 years, thankfully. And so I think the conversation around this movie has increased during that time.
Well, it's sort of a similar situation now where things have gotten so bad that it's like we need action. And that's exactly what this film is. It's just things get so bad and then they continue to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, just in the States, it's that whole dream of the 90s, well, that's when Mark and I were running around as teenagers. Nobody cares. Everything's great. Why would anybody need to strike? But yeah, when I started trying to get a job in America, I mean, I live in Japan now, partly because just every job I got was kind of a, felt like a scam, and there were no unions to join. I mean, I've never been part of a union, so
I have for 1 year. It's a mixed bag, but it wasn't a particularly strong union, and it was a film industry related thing, and they went on strike and didn't get very much for it a couple of years ago, and that's unrelated to this strike.
Right. So a bummer story.
I was
guess
in a supermarket union for like 9 years, but I mean, we still had absolutely miserable wages.
Yeah, I remember when the supermarket chain Publix came to town and they were non-union, and there were people striking outside for like protesting a non-union grocery store coming to town. That wouldn't happen now. That was
actually,
like early 90s.
actually, I my parents just came to visit, and my mom was so happy to give me this Publix bag from Georgia. Um,
Boo.
and
No,
she was
actually,
like,
it's cool. Has pumpkins on it.
no, it's fine. She's like, oh, Publix is good because it's owned by the employees. I'm like, what does that mean? Is that their excuse for not having a union or something?
Is it a co-op? I'm not even sure.
I don't think so.
Well, maybe it's like Moog, where they were owned 49% by the employees. I'm sure Matt knows what I'm talking about, but to any of the other listeners, basically the oldest synthesizer company in the world that's the most important was bought out and then subsequently destroyed, and all their employees were fired, or most of them were, and manufacturing was entirely moved from U.S. to China. So,
oh, really? I didn't know that. I'm glad I have an
oh
old
yeah. Yeah, the factory. There's all these memes where the Moog factory has a Spirit Halloween sign on it.
one. Oh, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
You
painful.
just hang on to your Voyager over there, bud.
Yeah.
You hang on to it.
But anyway, talk about the whole Publix thing. I was just like, okay, let's be straight. There are several things that my mom said in the car as a relatively old lady that I would not want to repeat on this podcast. So now I'm curious if that's like a veiled comment about it actually being quite horrible that it's owned by the employees. Anyway, I
I
guess I
have
don't.
heard companies described as like owned by the employees before. But I've never, yeah, I'm also not usually quite sure what it means.
The Jenkins
yeah.
family holds a major stake in the company. However, the operation is entirely employee owned. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, that.
Well, I mean, yeah, typically like that's described, at least in America, as a co-op, so that
Oh,
the
80%.
oh, okay,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
mean to interrupt. Jenkins family owns 80%. The
Oh.
employees own the rest.
Oh, okay.
Employee owned company.
They own the scraps. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So when the employees own the majority of the company, that means that the company can't make any decisions without the employees' consent. So that's advantageous to a local community. So let's say in a socialist utopia or something, the citizens of Detroit would own the car manufacturers that are there, so that the citizens of Detroit would then have to approve any time that factory would be moved out of town or out of country. And so in theoretically, it would be very beneficial for Detroit to have the citizens own that factory, because who would vote to have their own jobs be vacated?
Yeah.
So that's why a co-op is typically like a coffee shop where there's 15 or 20 employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are a couple of game companies that operate like that. I believe the guys who make Dead Cells are a co-op, and there are a couple of other ones I can't think of off the top of my head. But yeah, that's something that probably should be more prevalent.
Well, yeah,
Definitely
I
should.
I was assuming we would get onto video games eventually on this podcast, because that is definitely an industry where unionization is badly needed.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the most exploited group of people on Earth right now, but aside from VFX artists.
Yeah, I was just reading an article this morning about that, where it's like September, just like 2 months ago, is when all the Marvel VFX people actually decided maybe we should start. Well, I started a union. I guess they'd already been thinking about it, but yeah.
Well, they voted, like, yeah.
That late in the game, that's crazy. It was 2 months ago.
Well, I remember reading
they
about
were busy.
Back in Endgame, like the scene where Tony Stark's dying, they didn't do any makeup on set because makeup artists are unionized and VFX people are not.
Mm-hmm.
So it made more sense financially to just like special effects his face on.
It's that's apparently very common with those films. You imagine just if you imagine that all that stuff, all that junk at the end looking just 20% better just because they paid for it.
What an idea. You know, because I work at a comic book store, and you know that's another industry where the artists and creators of all that, you know, superhero content have been historically ravaged for their, you know, intellectual property, and you know still there's creators who are being exploited and not credited. You know, like how many writers and artists get actual writing credits in Marvel movies? It's like zero, even though they created those characters
Yeah.
that are up there.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
you know, recently this company called Aftershock Comics declared bankruptcy, and um, they had sold several of their comics as options to various streaming companies, and you know the creators got absolutely zero notice for that, and because they declared bankruptcy, they're not even getting paid for their work making those comics, but they could just get away with that because there's no comic book creator union.
I believe that's called getting fingered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
yeah,
remember.
So,
Well,
if that's not the official term, it should
I
be.
get it.
I've recently been reading and watching a lot of stuff about like Image Comics and Todd McFarlane and how they broke away from Marvel because of all of that stuff.
Mm.
And then as soon as Todd McFarlane was in charge, he started treating his writers and artists the exact same way.
He's a real hypocrite. And he sucks.
That's the
Yeah,
yeah,
and
the
you have to-
absolute power thing, you know.
It's one thing to hear about like the creators of Superman dying penniless, you know, 80 years after nobody thought comic books were gonna do anything. But then there's stuff where I don't know, Ed Brubaker created Winter Soldier back when comic book movies were not a huge deal, and then you know he's still alive, still putting out really good stuff, and sees the $300 million whatever 15 movie deal with Sebastian Stan, and probably gets nothing out of that or very little.
Titled after the character he created.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awful.
What I always hate with that conversation is when you bring it up to like a comic book fan, and their argument is like, "Well, they signed the contract; it's legal." And it's the legal doesn't mean good and right and okay.
I mean, you could go down a wormhole of a record label stuff. Like I just saw an article that record labels are going to try to make it hard or impossible for artists to re-record any of their music within 30 years.
Because they're pissed at what Taylor Swift's doing.
Yeah, that's what I'll say to Taylor break there.
It is infuriating when you think about it. Like they've just, you know, if you care about music, if any music at all, you've loved an artist who's been just absolutely screwed by a record label at some point.
Looks like John Fogerty
record labels have
turned
songs. Yeah, record labels have turned the most famous musician in the world to a champion of the little guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's better than the time when they tried to do that with Trump, if you're far right. The champion, the little guy, Donald Trump. What?
I honestly, you know, I would trust Taylor Swift to do like a fall test for me, a stranger, much more than I would trust Donald Trump to even, buy me a hot dog if he owed me $1,000.
Be a fantastic hot dog, the best.
I'm sorry, that was a messed up metaphor, but
I was about to say that metaphor was not fully formed when you started opening your mouth.
It was the hot dog of metaphors.
We could see you thinking as it was happening, and it was kind of stressful, to be honest.
I'm trying to keep you guys on your toes.
For me, I don't know if this resonated with you. The thing, I guess, you know, like, labor stuff. Of course, I've seen some of that, but the one that really got me was when they first are talking about the fact that they might get kicked off of their land, and the one guy just kind of mumbles like, "My grandfather owned this land," you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, that's because they don't reference that a whole lot. That you know, this isn't the only issue with this community.
Well, that gets into the one thing that I do find kind of weird about this whole movie is like they're talking about this was our land, we were here first, and the Anglos came. But they're like the Spanish, right? They're not the Mayans.
That's a good point.
There's a
whole line of exploitation. I think by this point the Mexican people were very much like a mixed people, as opposed to the Spanish. But this area of the world, you know, was conquered several times, and the Americans were just, as of this point, the last to do it.
Yeah. I mean,
But
the Mexicans that I know do identify more with. They identify with that country and its history more than they do the Europeans who came over.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I read that situation. I was basically, they probably are mixed, but I was thinking of people that have been there a while. Of course, this is also New Mexico. It's better than Old Mexico. It's a new one, so new and improved Mexico.
This is more about racism than it is about land ownership, and really, it's kind of a refreshing look at racism because people sort of talk about it openly, and there obviously are some highly dramatized, but the part where the early on in the film when the guy says, well, if you won't do it, I'll find an American, and the music goes dun, dun, dun. And then I put in my notes, an American wouldn't do that, ha ha ha, and then immediately they talk about how Americans aren't going to do that. So
yeah.
So it's pretty realistic as far as I don't know.
It was a more
Never
realistic
in my mind.
racism than a lot of racism films end up being.
There is frequent talk about how the Anglo miners have better treatment, better pay. In other camps, they might have running water. What an idea! So I think that's sort of bigotry, and racism is used as a way to manipulate the Anglo miners. So
yes, that's such a good point when they bring that up.
Yeah, the mining company can say, well, we're paying you more than these Mexicans, so you should feel lucky for how fortunate and well treated you are.
And then he makes the great point that's like, well, then equality is going to help both of us.
Yeah.
That's
an issue addressed really well in Meituan when the white miners go on strike, and so then the company brings in African American scabs to work the mine, so to create strife between different populations of miners.
Well, I mean, a lot of racism exists because there's a class divide, and so people at the bottom of the class divide are like, well, who can I kick down to? Other races,
Yeah.
And then in those races, who can I kick down to? The women, right? And this film even addresses that.
Yeah.
It's like someone thought about the script, or Michael Wilson thought about the script as he was writing it,
Yeah.
I guess that's the nice thing of this being basically completely unhinged from Hollywood. You have these creatives finally just like, well, we can do whatever we want. So of course I got kicked out of a few towns in the process filming this, towns where film here and you'll leave in black boxes. I think it's literally one of the quotes.
Well, people were firing guns over the set while they were filming it, or over the field. But this reminds me of Citizen Kane in a way, in that way, where it is good because somebody was just allowed to make something pure.
Yeah.
And that's sad, really, if you think about it. Like, we could have had a lot of movies this good, and we probably were robbed of them because of the just how things were, the establishment.
It also makes me, frustrated when, if a movie from the 60s or 70s exhibits a certain kind of racism, and, audience will be like, well, that's just, that was normal for the time. And this is a movie made in 1954 where it was acknowledging that it's normal for the time, and that's bad. So it's maybe we shouldn't I don't want to censor any movies. I don't want to excise them from the record, but I don't think we should be making excuses for racism just because it was 40 years ago. I think we should be free to acknowledge it when we see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point I was going to say was the closest film we've had to a film that tries to talk about these kind of issues recently was Barbie this year. And it's so manacled by the fact that it's a corporate property that they're we'll pay lip service to all these ideas, but no, everything's fine though.
Luke, I was about to say I was I'll let Luke go first, but I was about to say, as you know, I juxtapose movies like Weirdo, and was actually juxtaposing this with a rewatch of Barbie. So I'd watch like 20 minutes of this and then 20 minutes of Barbie, and like what you're saying,
man.
I was like, what's they both have the angle, but Barbie seems a little blunted because it can't say just like rip Mattel down because Mattel's owns the IP or whatever. So
yeah, so before I
make
went
them
and saw Barbie, people have been talking about it like, oh, it's this feminist masterpiece. And then you watch the film and it's like, yeah, sure, they mention a lot of buzzwords, but at the end of the day, what do they actually do? Nothing, because they're still trying to sell dolls to little girls.
But I think that's the advantage of using a director like Greta Gerwig, who's able to communicate, feminist and anti-patriarchy messages in like a big, sparkly, fun musical. And yeah, it's not going to be as nuanced or as gritty as Salt of the Earth. But if a movie can have a bell hooks joke and make $1 billion, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I did like and appreciate Barbie. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to shit on it completely,
Yeah.
but it's just the way people talked about it compared to what it actually was.
yeah,
I haven't seen it yet, so
Saw the Earth is quite double barreled. I mean, like again, like I was saying, if you just took on women's rights this hard or just took on labor rights this hard, that's already a movie, and it could be a very good movie. But this is like, nope, both same time, go 90 minutes.
it's great. It's a discussion with itself and with the audience. It's pretty brilliant. And obviously, like I said, I don't need to be pitched feminism or socialism, but I appreciate that the audience this movie was talking to, however small that audience probably actually was, because probably like 50 people saw this until 1970 something when it kind of came out for real. But,
And I found the vote tallies interesting because when they vote to go on strike, it's like 193-5. I'm like, who are those 5 assholes? But when it's when
but
when
that's the thing, it's realistic, right? I mean, it's and then the numbers come back when the vote comes up for the women to go on strike, and it's just almost even, and then everyone's
like
kind of
130 or
grumble.
105. Right.
It's it's very dramatic and interesting, and the women get to do their thing, and they destroy cars, and it rules. Anyway, I'm just getting excited thinking about it.
I also found interesting that they make the company, of course, look like a bunch of insensitive pricks. But the real vitriol in this movie seems to be for the law enforcement, right? Because the sheriff, you don't trust this smiling sheriff. It's not. I mean, the company's obviously asking them to do this, but it's the stormtroopers that have to come in and I mean, they seem very happy to be doing it as well. But I guess that's the creepy part.
Oh yeah, the police exist to defend Capitol.
Yeah,
this is one of the most accurate depictions of police in a film.
That's the funny thing is that, or funny, I don't know if funny is the right word. The scene where they're beating Ramon is completely wild for a film of this vintage, but it's exactly what we'd expect from a movie now, or maybe even from 20 years ago.
Yeah, it takes like 4 police officers to repossess a radio from a pregnant woman.
I also
she even says in that scene, right? Like, no, they want you to start a fight.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's what the police want now. They know they're being filmed. And so if you're protesting racist action by the police, they want the world to see how violent they can retaliate against protesters.
I mean, I live right near Cop City. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yeah.
I have not.
Cop City.
City.
Maybe you gotta explain that.
Oh, well, they're trying to tear down a huge amount of forest to build a training facility that's not necessary and is in fact just a massive militarization facility with, I think they're getting a tank or something.
Oh, so they're not
protesting.
They're not rebooting the Police Academy movies then.
They shot a protester 37 times who had their hands up.
Okay.
And they said the protester shot first. Their body cams, they didn't have body cams, the Georgia State Patrol. Then there is an audio that was caught where someone says, "You shot one of your own." that is on tape.
Okay.
The officers were not prosecuted for that murder. The protests are still ongoing. The protests are going on all over the country about this because everyone knows that Atlanta had already in advance booked other like police from other parts of the country to use that training facility. There are a lot of contracts. It's a huge thing.
So yeah, it's
And
basically a for-profit
we,
exercise.
one of the slogans is "Cop City will never be built," and I hope that holds true. But I'm also too fragile to go down there and get beat to death protesting it. But I respect everyone who does, and fuck Cop City.
Oh, that's a
Don't
question
build
we
it.
should ask then. What protests have we all been to?
Very little, unfortunately.
When I was working with hippies, I went to a couple anti-golf, not golf, well, whatever that one was in 2003, the second Gulf War in Portland, Maine. We'd go there a few weekends we went and hung out there, but then after that we go get a nice dinner. So I don't know, it feels a little disingenuous.
Yeah, I mean,
When you protest and then go get a nice dinner.
I walked out of middle school because of the Rodney King beating. I don't know if that counts. Probably not, but
Yeah, I went to a couple during that glut of protests after George Floyd.
Mhm.
That was pretty intense.
Yeah, I also went to Iraq War ones, although I was 13 and skipping school to go to them.
Yeah. I went to actually I was in college when those were happening, and yeah, me and a couple friends went to New York, and we did absolutely nothing to prevent the war. So that kind of disillusioned me. I protested for a while.
Yeah.
Also, we were like driving by. It's like, hey, we should, we didn't hear about it. We should join that. So we just went and, we didn't really plan it. We just ended up there.
I mean, I have friends who protest a lot, and I respect them tremendously. I'm an insanely anxious person.
Mhm.
I guess
a coward.
The anti-protest kind of when Obama was inaugurated and people were like, super happy about it at the time, at least. I went to Centennial Park in Atlanta where they were having like kind of a big shindig for that. That was like an anti-protest though. People were happy.
I think that's a celebration.
Yeah, but it's like a political celebration, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to stretch the taffy on this question, I guess.
It's not without risk considering how many racists were super down for violence after we got a black president.
Yeah,
for sure.
And the Deep South, yeah. Although Atlanta, I guess, gets a waiver from being the Deep South, but
who the hell knows?
I see a lot of protests here in Japan, but it's like protests about foreign wars, just in the street where no one involved is. I respect them, I like it, but it's like I don't know what they're hoping to achieve by just standing outside Nakano train station and protesting. Like
there's a
the
lot
Gaza
of
Strip.
Nuclear protests. I guess that's a little more pertinent.
Those are fairly regular, yeah, and obviously you see those in Hiroshima where it does make sense.
We also have the political trucks that roll around blasting slogans, so that kind of sucks.
Yeah, I've
Like
always said
sometimes
when I can vote here, I'll vote for whichever party doesn't have a truck driving around blasting out slogans.
yeah, especially where you live. I get them a little more rarely. There's a big bridge like about 100 meters from my house. So usually if I get annoyed by one, it's because it's over there and my window's open. So yeah.
I mean, actually, I know exactly what party I'm voting for when I get my citizenship because Japan still has a functional communist party. So
amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I do wonder, like in Salt of the Earth, I know this mining union that the movie is based on, they were kicked out of the larger union organization for apparent communist ties, and so I wonder how many of these people would have identified as communists at the time, because I think most of the world identified communism with like Stalinism and Maoist ideas. So even if you fit the definition of a communist, you might not, even for yourself, might not want to call yourself that because of the stigma of the term. Because I think it's certainly politically, like in America, political suicide to call yourself a communist or even a socialist, but I would assume at the time it would just like that's just a non-starter.
It wouldn't be political suicide. It would be literal suicide. You would be shot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, today, like, ask the average person on the street what communism means, and it's like, oh, communists are the people who want black women in video games or whatever. Like, it's no one knows what the word even means.
Yeah.
And you ask, like, people can be very, very communist, but they would never describe themselves as that because communist, it just means bad. Just means bad and different.
Yeah, it's like we don't even talk about populism like it's a thing. And populism was sort of this huge overlap with the Trump thing, even though all of that was lies. But still, it's like a lot of what people wanted from Trump was sort of a version of socialism twisted through a weird funhouse mirror.
That's it. Like,
so messed up.
The thing which quote unquote liberals refuse to admit is that working people have genuine concerns. And Trump was never going to fix them, but at least he addressed them, right? What they actually need is communism, but they're not going to get that. They're going to get Hillary Clinton's and Joe Biden saying like, no, status quo is fine. Let's carry on as is. I'm very.
That's why, like in 2016, you heard a lot of people say, "Well, I'd vote for either Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump." It's like, it sounds like you're not paying attention to the substance of their arguments, but the sort of everyman appeal of both of those guys, hit a chord for people, even though Trump was literally crapping in a golden toilet, like literally.
I honestly feel like this honestly ties into Hollywood having way too much sway over us, is because we almost don't have a left and right. We have a feel good and feel angry.
Well,
the so-called American left would be considered right in Europe.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's Bill Hicks or George Carlin because I was playing them both in the car recently. But the idea like, hey, vote for me, says the puppet here. Vote for me, says the other puppet. It's the same motherfucker controlling the puppets.
Well, Matt, you had a line that you often use, which I assume you stole from somewhere, but you would always say that Hillary won the vote, but Bernie won the argument.
Did I say that? That sounds too smart for me.
Yeah, you used to say that a lot. Yeah, that's why I assumed you stole it from a podcast or something.
Yeah. Okay.
Good job stealing that. That's good.
Yeah, I like in America, I think the Republican Party, or what it's mutated into over the last 40 years, has done such a good job of shifting the conversation in the political center in America to the right, and the Democratic Party has failed to come up with a way to pull it back. And so the Democratic Party is just so dedicated to like keeping things the status quo. And so we're going to keep people like Joe Biden in power, even though they have no fresh ideas and they're 80 years old, that they have no answer to, MAGA rhetoric. And so it's very frustrating, when people want gun control or healthcare or whatever, but neither party has a solution.
And you can see that if any effort is put forth by those specific Democrats, they have to stealth it. Like, remember when Obama ran on, I approve of civil unions, but not gay marriage, and then he had to slip it in 5 years later. It's just sort of this thing where that would have been political suicide in 2008, which is wild. Something that is should be completely legal, is completely legal. Some places was
Japan's
political
a good
suicide.
20 years behind. Last week's headline was the prime minister giving a very wishy-washy statement. Well, since it's illegal, it probably shouldn't happen, says my very conservative party.
Meanwhile, the Guitar Wolf's movie Wild Zero was a super pro-trans movie about 25 years ago.
Oh, we're talking culture versus politics.
Yeah,
that's such a fascinating thing about Japan is the cultural, the laissez-faire culture, but the like political conservatism.
Yeah, people are just not actually very interested in the mainstream politics or the law. Like, even generally, like, there's what the law says, and there's what everyone agrees is the law in Japan. With a lot of things, like with it's not a very big example, but at all of the train stations, there's the escalators, and everyone stands on one side so that people can go walking on the free side. all of the official rules are like, please do not walk on the escalators. But the accepted rule is you stand to one side so people can walk on the escalator. And that's just how Japan treats everything. It doesn't matter what the rules say, it's what everyone agrees is the rule.
Well, I live in the United States, where somebody just stands in the middle of the escalator and you have to say, excuse me, and maybe they'll listen to you.
Yeah.
I guess the recent thing would be for the pandemic. Everybody in Japan was basically following the protocol, but there was no policy or law. I mean, there's a policy, but there was no law or statute in place for that stuff.
Oh yeah, they dropped the mask sort of suggestion or whatever you want to call it, and for about a month everyone stopped wearing masks. And I've noticed most people are just wearing them again now, because I guess they were like, oh, we stopped wearing masks and people are catching COVID, so I guess we should just put them back on.
But I mean, that's the thing in
incredible.
East Asian cultures, is to wear a mask when you're sick.
Yeah.
I was hoping maybe more countries in the West would sort of adopt that, but nope.
Part of why I got COVID in March 2020 was because I was worried about it, but I was afraid that if I wore a mask, people would stare at me. And I got COVID. So, and people stared at me for wearing a mask for the 3 years afterwards. And the end.
No, I know where I got my COVID.
Times.
That was in a class, a 5-year-old girl coughing on me for 50 minutes straight, and 2 days later I had it. So yeah, I was like, okay, I know where I got that from. So that was film.
So I have an important question.
Oh yeah, go for that first.
Luke, is there a Pokemon game with Zinktown?
Not quite. I think all the towns in Gold and Silver were named after metals, and all the towns in Ruby and Sapphire are named after ores, but I don't think any of them were as obvious as zinc.
All right.
I thought you were
just had to check.
I thought you were going to ask him if there's a Pokemon game with a labor strike.
There is a Pokemon game where the bad guy team are like trying to basically get all the Pokemon to go on strike, but then it turns out that it's just because they want no one else to have Pokemon so that they can be unopposed.
So that's kind of the opposite of Salt of the Earth, then.
Yeah. Also, when you sent me the YouTube link and it's a film called Salt of the Earth and it said documentary, for a brief second I genuinely thought we were watching a documentary about salt.
I thought doesn't Salt of the Earth mean older people? But at the end, the quote was about children or the salt of the earth.
Okay, that's a good point. I've never really if you salt the earth, it dies, right?
Yeah, it's a confusing idiom for sure.
Children salt the earth.
I have been thinking, like, what exactly does that mean? I kind of have a vague understanding of what it means, but yeah, like now we're like, okay, let's define it. I'm like, didn't make any sense.
The first result, noun: 1, a most worthy person; 2, a decent, dependable, unpretentious person.
Okay,
so
but then
people.
Then
their kids are cool, man. They went to jail. They were just like sticking their tongue out at the cops. These kids were down.
Oh yeah, sorry. Just before I start getting to any concluding things, I just have to throw in one thing where I was giggling a little bit in this movie when the kids are like, "Hey, the scab's over the hill," and then it turns into like a western with no horses for like 3 minutes.
Yeah,
and they're just running around chasing each other in the desert, and I'm like, "This is a western and no horses." That I found that weirdly amusing. So, okay, that was my thought there.
Yeah, that was.
Of course, we're still in the Netherlands of not the top 100 or the bottom 100, but let's put this on the how much of film, how much filth. I mean, to me,
man.
Yeah, I'm watching it on digital, and I feel the filmy quality coming through, maybe because of that realistic style. I forgot the proper name for that.
I was surprised. I mean, I'm usually the I'm one of the pro old film people. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this. I liked it more than a lot of the top guys.
Yeah, it took 20 minutes to click, but then I was like, oh, this actually is something like a little different. So that's a big plus.
It's absolutely a film, although I think it was officially filth in the eyes of the film boards at the time of release.
It's the only film to be blacklisted. I mean, people were blacklisted.
The only one
film to be blacklisted, apparently. Yeah, because they couldn't make them otherwise. This is very much guerrilla filmmaking. So,
and the Herbert J. Biberman wasn't, he was a kind of a jobber director, but Michael Wilson, he has uncredited writing credits. Well, he's uncredited on Bridge Over the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia and A Place in the Sun. Like, he's a big deal talent, and so for him to have to like hide that because of his political affiliations is really sad, and you have to wonder how many other people were stifled, or continued to be stifled for their beliefs in America.
There is only one-star review for this. It's kind of long. I think I'll just read the first paragraph and the last paragraph, and please wait till I finish to start yelling.
I've already read it. Go ahead.
Doesn't take long for communist theme to emerge. Dale Holmgren. Okay. I love that communists are blacklisted, not by Congress, but by Hollywood for agreeing with Leninism, which one of its founding tenets is that capitalist countries must be violently overthrown. Then they go out and make a film that proves they are communists. He goes on for quite a while. It's hard to know which is more wretched, the script, the acting, or the editing, reminiscent of Tommy Wiseau's The Room. But above all, the wretchedness is in the ham-handed depiction of unions as all good. Illinois has lost tens of thousands of jobs to the South because it is not a right-to-work state. It pushes out non-union companies.
I see this writer has another review for a restaurant. He says, the boot is very delicious. I could eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
7 out of 38 found it helpful, by the way, just in case you're wondering. So anyway, that's just one to, obviously this person is coming from a different place than the people on this podcast are. So
the idea, I know you guys haven't seen The Room yet. John, have you seen The Room?
I have.
The idea that this is the idea that this is as bad as The Room is completely insane.
Yeah. Like, I mean, just conceptually, The Room is a work of an egomaniacal hack with a lot of money to burn. This is the work of a group of like-minded individuals coming together at great risk for themselves professionally and physically to try and make art. Like this is the kind of thing you would hope for to come out of movie. Like, even if this isn't like your cup of tea, it's kind of a beautiful thing that these people were so passionate that they wanted to make this movie together.
I mean, if someone made a Trump movie that was this good, I'd at least be like, well, it's at least watchable.
Well, yeah, because people do try and make Trump movies, and they're all god awful.
They're all terrible. Yeah. It's just clear. Yeah, it's so clear cut. You can see the trailers for them, and you're just like, oh, they obviously hired someone. They just had their friend edit it using a freeware. It's just so obvious.
Well, yeah, because anyone's fuck it, I just to say it. Anyone smart and talented would not have those opinions.
Yeah, I agree.
Hey, Mark, do you want to do a 10?
Yeah. Oh, hold on a second. I was just gonna
read. I was just gonna read like 4 of the headlines. I thought that gets the point across because there's a lot of 10s for this. There's only one, lots of 10s. So more than just a blacklisted film. Banned in the USA. That's like the 2 Live Crew. I like that. Seen today. This is not at all a controversial film.
I wish that were true.
Yeah, wish so. It's maybe wishful thinking, but yes. A very precious and resonant look at what Hollywood might have been, as we were kind of saying at the top there. So at least, yeah, I think people who dig film will get this movie, especially right now, which was kind of, I guess, the point of doing it. So
So did this film have like a life as a VHS tape that was being taken into union meetings and shown, or was it totally just buried in a desert somewhere?
It definitely got buried in the desert for a little while. I'll look at the legacy section.
I believe it turned into a Reefer Madness type thing where everyone's like, watch the banned film. They released it as, the banned film from communism. And obviously people watched it and were like, wow, this is so much better than Reefer Madness, which is super boring.
Here's what the
That's
wiki
my own
says.
opinion.
The film found a new life in the 1960s and gradually reached larger audiences through union halls, women's associations, and film schools. The
Yeah, that's what
50th
I was assuming.
Yeah, 50th anniversary of the film saw a number of commemorative conferences. Surprisingly, Noam Chomsky praised the film, and that helped. Um, and then released on DVD in 1999. So it's certainly been like findable in the past 25 years for sure. And well, hey, you can watch it on YouTube for no problem now. So,
I mean, the film. This is a little bit of a tangent, but the film that really kind of radicalized me in high school was Native Son, which was
I was going to bring up the book about 20 minutes ago, and then I didn't.
Yeah, it's not a fantastic adaptation of the book, but the book is fantastic, and that is way more overtly communist.
I was going to say, because I thought that had an interesting of bringing the main character of that book into the communist system, which I think was what I was going to talk about. But then oh yeah, is he set up for a murder? Sorry, it's been high school since I read it. I do remember it being great. Didn't know there was a movie, so I guess I'll stick with the book.
There are 3 apparently. I didn't even know that what I watched was the second one. Oh, music by James Mtume. That's awesome. Has Matt Dillon in it.
Oh, okay.
Anyway. And Elizabeth McGovern from Once Upon a Time in America.
Oh wow.
Okay. Anyway, it's one of those
times keep dropping those.
Yeah. We're not going to get through episodes anymore without bringing up Once Upon a Time in America, which is kind of depressing.
I mean, it's 300 hours long, so it just contains the entirety of the film industry.
You know what radicalized me?
What's
Working in a supermarket for 9 years.
Oh, that'll do it.
That tracks. My first
honestly,
job was an instrument repair shop. Is way off the path.
There now, Lotso Bear has the Blu-ray I bought of Once Upon a Time in America, and kind of regret buying. It was only $5. Well, it's a long movie. I'll just get the Blu-ray, kind of.
Oh yeah, if you're thinking like dollar per hour, that's great value.
Yeah.
Sure. Like how JRPGs used to say on the back of the box, like 200 hours of gameplay, and when you're 12, that sounds like a good thing.
That's just great. 200 hours of random encounters for only $70 because they were always priced higher than the other games. But honestly, I should have bought one of them because they're all worth a ton of money now.
We were just taking turns talking about what radicalized us. Honestly, what radicalized me was Catholicism in Star Trek.
Nice,
right?
No one should be rich. It's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it is for a camel to pass the eye of a needle. And then for Star Trek, we all should be working for a society where there's no money and there's no poverty, and the environment is gleaming and clean and free of pollution. So I was set on a course when I was like 6 years old.
This probably feels more like a Star Trek episode than most of the things we've watched so far for this podcast.
Bell Riots coming in
about
2024.
3/4 of the Star Trek films.
Yeah, actually, it's possibly more Star Trek than everyone's favorite Wrath of Khan. Not that I don't love that movie, but that's more of like a Moby Dick movie.
That's why I love 4 and 6, because they're like expressly political.
6 is the one.
I've just recently been getting my girlfriend into Star Trek, and she was I deliberately picked like the most over the top woke communist episodes, and she was like, "Oh, I just thought it was like, spacemen fighting and having sex. I didn't know it was like this." She's super into it.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I
and
guess
of course,
for me,
she knows correctly that Picard is the best.
No, I guess for me it would also probably be Trek. I mean, well, I know John from a Trek board, so
yeah, there you
go. It's not too far a stretch. Did anyone have
great? I was just saying the great thing is that there is so much Trek that you can just keep taking it in. I'm watching Voyager for the first time. Everybody knows that, but I keep bringing it up.
Yep. Any final thoughts about this movie before we roll it into the tank?
I want to show it to all of our Japanese colleagues.
Oh, cool. I want to show this to my mom, who's like, I think technically a conservative, but I can always reach her on the level of the sort of, populism, workers' rights thing. I mean, she was a teacher. She was in teachers union. You're in a union. You can't Can't take backsies.
My
Back on the
parents are
union.
kind of leftist, but very centrist. So I'm very happy that I've radicalized my brother and sister into wishing death on lots of politicians.
Oh yeah.
My mom said a few things in the car last week.
Oh yeah, I've seen what your dad shares on Facebook. So
Yeah.
I think he finally learned to stop doing that. But
yeah, now he just
Uh,
comments on my pictures with things like nice trees.
I mean, to his credit, he did say that January 6th was bad right when it happened.
right.
That's more than we got from a lot of people.
Well, it got to the point where he was like making these like Facebook posts about commentators on like Fox News. So I had no idea what he was talking about. So that was fine. I mean,
It's like there are people I know who make posts about sports and they'll just say the name of a person and what they and some maneuver. I was like, okay,
sure,
what?
why not?
Johnson did a 46-32. Okay,
Why
I don't
not?
know.
That's like when people give
great.
you their Wordle scores or whatever it is.
So there's at least one person I'm Facebook friends with who keeps posting out of context stuff about Real Housewives of somewhere. Okay, and cool.
Man, social media is great.
Yeah. If there's
Speaking of
anything
which,
that
you
we
can
really
find
need-
this podcast on Twitter at.
On what?
On what?
On
I'm not
Twitter.
calling it anything else.
I keep blowing my daughter's mind because a few days ago I was like, oh, it was because I saw I said Twitter just showed me that Matthew Perry died when we were all in the car, and I was like, it's not Twitter. It's like it is on my phone because I never updated it, so I still have Twitter on my phone.
I just went to x.com and it says twitter.com. It redirected to twitter.com/home and it says something went wrong, try reloading, and I keep reloading and nothing happens. So, anyway, that's where we live.
Better than that.
You don't need staff.
Better than that.
Yeah.
Support
rent.
our movement, or just listen to our podcast.
Now you know what?
Podcast,
Fuck
yes.
our
Or don't.
podcast. Go make sure you're signed up to your union.
Okay.
That's our message at the end of
Hey,
this
you know what?
episode.
Stop Cop City. That's my plug.
Yeah.
John, you should talk about your podcast though, because these guys don't know about it.
Sure. Real quick, I do want to just heap praise on the two leads of this movie. So Juan Chacon, who plays Ramon, he was like a union leader from New Mexico, and originally they didn't want to cast him because he was too gentle, but as like a real guy. But I think he does a great job, and he has this great like Anthony Quinn-esque look. Like he just looks like a rugged, handsome dude.
Yeah.
And then Rosaura Revueltas.
See, you feel my pain now.
Yeah, but no, she just has such an incredible presence. Like she's just so magnetic and just has this like iconic face that is just hypnotizing, and she can. It feels like she can bear the burden of this whole community on her shoulders. So just all praise to them. So yeah, I co-host a podcast called Popcorn Eschaton with my friend Scott Thorough. It's on the Zebras in America feed. We focus on religion and or leftism in movies. Doesn't have to necessarily be movies that are directly about that, but we can maybe come at them in a different angle. We might be doing so, we've talked about the 36th Chamber of Shaolin in the past, and the next episode we're going to record is Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev. So we try and run the gamut. It's a good time, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Quasar Sniffer.
Andrew Rublev is one every 2 years. I'm like, I'm going to try watching it again, but it's so long and intimidating.
Yeah.
Great movie, very long, very intimidating. Okay. Yeah. What? Huh?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you for joining us, John.
It was a pleasure. I'm so glad you guys like this movie. It was a real pleasure to talk about it with you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it. This is the most appropriate film we've done since the strike started.
Nice.
And it makes me rethink all the crazy shit I was going to bring to the table in the next couple of months.
No, I'm still going to bring crazy shit.
Yeah, I probably
Absolutely.
Anyway, plug Podcastius.
I think we I already cut on that silence because I was realizing, and Luke was calling me out psychically, like it's kind of it's not really the time to do that one. Because I started
That's
saying, it's
right.
like, this is kind of a weird context to say give us some money, and Luke was giving me the
Yeah,
side eye, so I kind of
you're
stopped
right.
in midstream there.
Yeah.
You're right. My brain was just in a weird loop.
Mine was too.
I did a
I'll
weird
cut-
thing where I worked a whole bunch and then took a long nap before doing this. I'm not usually this groggy.
Well, people are.
I'm terrible. If I have a nap, it's like I might as well just write the day off. I'm going to bed. I'm not a napper.
Well, Mark, you're lucky. People only hear my attempted hypocrisy and not yours then. So
You just cut that in and just put them back to back and repeat them a few times.
Yeah. Okay. I will stop the recording.